As a father of a young daughter and as someone who is still close to the young generation as the youngest member of the House of Representatives across Australia, I felt it incredibly important that the subject matter of this bill receive as much attention and publicity as possible. I feel that not only can I address this issue from the side of being a parent, but also from the perspective of someone who at least partially grew up at a young age in this digital world. For example, ICQ and MSN Messenger, later known as Windows Live Messenger, started in the late 90s when I was still a teenager, between around the ages of 14 to 16. And so I remember the interactions that started between youth at that age over those platforms. And Facebook, for example, started in 2004 when I was 21. Sometimes as parents we want to wrap our children up and protect them from the world. However, it is inevitable as they grow older and they face more and more contexts where they face more and more risk, which is in itself essential to growing, maturing and learning how to face and deal with difficult situations. But I do want the situation for my daughter and others growing up today at a young age to be better than it has been in the past. As an MP, while we may wish to sometimes take on the role of parents to protect our children as much as possible, there are certain angles from which to tackle this issue like this so that we can be as effective as possible. There are many areas of life where, quite frankly, it is not appropriate for MPs to act as if we are parents. Raising children is the first and foremost a right and responsibility of parents and families. What we can do, however, is work to address the outcomes of situations that children may find themselves in, or to try to prevent those situations from arising where possible. This becomes even clearer when the matter in question verges on severe civil legal matters, or indeed criminal matters. This subject, the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, is one that has wide-ranging outcomes, and some very serious ramifications stemming from peer pressure, jokes, malicious intent, revenge, or something in between. My colleagues will note my references so far to this legislation in the context of people of a school age. And while this legislation clearly has aspects to protect adults as well, it is particularly the effect that this legislation will have on young people that I want to discuss today. Online platforms become more and more advanced every day, and speaking to students in my electorate, I have become even more acutely aware of how quickly internet sharing platforms advance. While we may attempt to teach our children about the dangers of oversharing, whether it is initially online, in person, voluntary or involuntary, I would argue that the government has an important role to play, extending its oversight where a parent's reach ends. The internet is a wonderful tool for education, commerce, advocacy, health, and so many other issues and areas. But we all know that it can be used for the wrong reasons also, and not only provides a platform, but in fact makes it very easy for private material to spread and cause significant harm to an unsuspecting individual. Revenge porn, the distribution of images for entertainment, even images that are spread beyond what was thought to be a small group in confidence, are all covered by this legislation. And it is important that we work to address these situations before the impact on victims reaches a stage that it affects their reputation, employment prospects, relationships with family or friends, or their physical well-being and safety. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is very easy to look at legislation and see simply words, but there are always people behind these bills. And I urge my colleagues across the House to consider the impact of a scenario like this on them, their friends, their family or their neighbours. If we have the ability to prevent such serious harm coming to those individuals, we have an obligation to act. In May last year, I in fact spoke in a related bill, also working to keep children and teenagers safe. The Criminal Code Amendment Protecting Minors Online Bill 2017 sought to address the threat to young people, frequently posed by adults pretending to be teenagers who prepare or plan to cause harm to, procure or engage in sexual activity with a person under the age of 16 by the means of an online platform. And I've also worked closely with issues around sexual slavery and the exploitation of children as well throughout my work in leading the inquiry into modern slavery, both in Australia as well as in the supply chains of Australian businesses and organisations. While it had a different focus, the bill I mentioned before about minors online, that legislation a year ago is directly related to the matter we are discussing today as well. Carly's Law, as this bill became known, was brought about by the horror of what befell Carly Ryan, who I'm sure I don't need to remind my colleagues fell victim to an online predator posing to be someone of her age and was raped and murdered. We now have so much to do to attempt to keep pace with the internet and to keep our young people safe online, but the important point is we can do something. And the first person has already been charged under Carly's law. We're all elected in this place to work for our constituents and to keep our children safe to the greatest extent that the law allows, and we are continuing that important work again today in addressing the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. I would like to thank my Victorian Coalition colleague, the Minister for Communications, Senator the Honourable Mitch Farfield, for his work in bringing about the bill that we have before us today, as well as the then Assistant Minister for Communications, Paul Fletcher, and the then Assistant Minister for Communications, now Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who also contributed to the wider context that this legislation is in today. I'm aware that a number of amendments to this bill have been discussed and debated, which I'm pleased about, as it acknowledges the importance of this subject and shows that there is a significant commitment in this building to getting this legislation right. It is important to acknowledge that the approach and sentiment behind these amendments, and first and foremost with concern for those involved about minimising the harm done by individuals of malicious intent and empowering victims to take control over these situations. My concern over the amendments that involve criminal penalties, as well-meaning as they may be, is that it risks re-victimising people who have already gone through some awful experiences. Women's advocacy groups have been consulted in the formation of this legislation, and we've seen from statistics relating to other offences of sexual or intimate nature that for many people, having to testify about what has happened to you or having to give evidence or providing detail to the police can be incredibly distressing. I have my reservations about any components of the legislation that may force victims to relive these experiences, but certainly acknowledge that we are all coming from the same perspective in this debate, and that it is ensuring and preserving the welfare of people, primarily women and girls, whose trust is betrayed or who have no control over the situation. Now, why are these changes important, Madam Deputy Speaker? These changes are important because they are enabling people to take a proactive approach and to regain some control of a situation that previously was not within their control. Extending a parent or individual's reach and power over removing images, I believe, is a natural continuation of our existing legislation on the abuse of carrier services, because unfortunately these days it is far too easy for technology to invade all of our private lives, whether we are aware of it or not. Madam Deputy Speaker, in debating and I hope soon passing this legislation, the government is strengthening Australia's laws against technology-facilitated abuse, which will complement and extend existing criminal offence provisions at the Commonwealth and state and territory levels, and will provide victims with another option for timely and effective redress. The bill sends a clear message to the community that the sharing of intimate images without consent is not an acceptable practice. The civil and criminal penalties facing perpetrators in these offences are important, but most of all this bill will facilitate the quick removal of intimate images that have been shared without consent, which is the primary concern of victims and advocacy groups who have been heavily involved in this process. The E-Safety Commissioner can even have photos removed that have been photoshopped. I understand that this is the result of extensive public consultation with many stakeholders, including women's safety organisations, mental health experts, schools, victims, the E-Safety Commissioner and members of the government's online safety consultative working group. I also recognise the contribution that a number of social media platforms have made towards these changes. I was reading a few months ago, for example, about the ongoing collaboration between the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner and Facebook, and Facebook has been testing a proactive reporting tool in partnership with the E-Safety Commissioner, and I hope that that relationship and the ability to stop these images coming up improves even further. Now, social media really is central to this legislation, and it's fantastic that we have support in protecting Australian users, and as I said, we need to improve the goodwill and work in this space. I'm also incredibly passionate about this area of the law and policy, not only because I'm a father, but because as a human being I am compassionate about the fact that we need to stop these activities happening and to protect not only children but the wider community from these activities. I don't want to see people's lives ruined due to either a situation getting outside of their control or due to the abuse of trust by someone they thought was close to them. I've had this legislation on my radar since the bill was passed by the Senate back in February. My office, in conjunction with my friend and colleague, the Chief Government Whip, Nola Marino, coordinated several school visits for the National Day of Action Against Bullying and Violence to speak to students in my electorate of Dunkley of varying ages about cyber safety back in March, to spread the message of caution and education about the reach and impact that social media and online hosting services can have. As many school assemblies do, our visit started off with many students restless and possibly distracted. But as Nola progressed through her talk, particularly raising the situation of Carly Ryan, the students became still and fixed on her words. I believe that at least some students were thoroughly impacted by our conversations that day, particularly noting some of the conversations that occurred with students coming up to the Chief Government Whip and I after the presentation. And I would hope that if it changes behaviour or actions and perhaps prevents even one decision that may not have been thought through, then we have helped to make a difference. As the Chief Government Whip said at the time, young people know and think they know a lot more than their parents about being online, and need to also help younger people and younger siblings. The initial restlessness that we all met with at these forums that we held demonstrated this, which is why it can be so hard to get these messages through. But I'm optimistic that this bill helps address situations that people may find themselves in, while we also work to change attitudes and behaviours. The Chief Government Whip at the time also drew the children's attention to the risk of such incidents, cyberbullying, revenge porn, and the impact that this may have on future careers. Unfortunately, with mobile devices in our rooms 24/7, not only does it mean that there's so much more risk of not only having material spread around, but also bullying, and especially cyberbullying, has a much greater reach, being able to continue to harass and intimidate people when they are in what should be the most private environment. Having this material, Madam Deputy Speaker, not only provides an avenue for bullying, but it can have serious repercussions for victims' futures, leading to anger, embarrassment, fear, defamation, poor performance at school or work, and even self-harm or suicide. But we can hand some of the power back to victims with this legislation. Lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, around 20% of Australians have experienced image-based abuse. 1 in 5 Australians aged 16 to 49 have experienced image-based abuse, although women aged 18 to 24 are more likely to be targets. This issue is far more wide-reaching than I think many of us would like to admit, and with our world becoming increasingly centred around the internet and increased connectivity and accessibility, the risk only will increase. This legislation works with victims and victims advocacy groups, addressing a variety of civil and criminal penalties to protect Australians. Today, our online reputation can be our greatest asset. To refer lastly to the support that the Chief Government Whip, Nola Marino, has shown for students in my electorate and across Australia, no police investigation will ever undo the harm, but we as a government can do what we can to limit it, and with a civil law focus, empower those who have been victimised by predators by passing the Enhancing Online Safety Non-Consensual Sharing of Intimate Images Bill 2018, which I wholeheartedly support.